The Princess of the Chalet School, Chapter 9, The Final Straw. Miss Bethany, having come to the momentous decision to get rid of Matron at half-term, made up her mind to speak to her in the afternoon. She was busy all the morning, teaching the seniors, seeing to the remaking of the 2 tennis courts, and discussing Margia's music with Herr Ansel. She was about to send for Matron and get the unpleasant, she knew it would be unpleasant, interview done, when the door burst open and Princess Elisaveta, with her face scarlet and her long brown hair flying wildly, literally tumbled into the room, followed by Joe, who looked worse. "Children!" exclaimed Miss Bethany severely. "What does this mean?" "It's the Robin," gasped Joe. "She's locked her in." Elisaveta could scarcely get the words out. "Who has?" demanded the head, looking as if she could have shaken the pair of them with pleasure. "Matron has, in her room. She's crying like anything," was the incoherent answer. "Do go and make her let her out." At this moment Miss Maynard appeared on the scene, looking angrier than anyone had ever seen Miss Maynard look. "Matron has locked the Robin into her own room," she said in hard tones, "and refuses to open the door for me or Miss Durant. Will you please come at once, madame, and make her let her out at once? The child will cry herself into a fit if it lasts much longer." Miss Bethany sped past them and up the stairs, where the few girls who happened to be in the house at the moment were clustered round the door, with shocked faces. The Robin was sobbing terribly. She was obviously quite hysterical, and Miss Bethany could hear the pitiful catches in her breath as she cried. Matron was standing by, a key in her hand, and a grimly determined expression on her face. Even when she saw the head-mistress, she made no attempt to move. "The key, if you please, Matron," said Miss Bethany. Matron held it down. "Robin has been very impertinent and troublesome," she said. "She deserves her punishment, and I must insist that you leave her to me. I cannot possibly keep order if you interfere with my punishments. I am a much older woman than you, and I have had far more experience. I must beg you to uphold my authority." "The key, if you please," said Miss Bethany in an icy tone. "As for your authority, Matron, in this school, you cease from this moment to have any. I am waiting for the key." Matron had gone red, but there was something in the dark eyes fronting her that made her give up the key. The next minute the door was open, and Robin was safe in the arms of her Tante Marguerite. She was a nervous, excitable child, and the experience had completely upset her. In all the 7 years of her life she had never been treated like this. Miss Bethany carried her off to the study and set to work to console her, but it was a long time before she could get the heavy sobs hushed and the child reduced to something like herself. When at length she lay on the couch, quiet at last, with only an occasional catch in her breath to show how violent the attack had been, the head sent for a drink of water for her, and then carried her upstairs to her own room. Quite worn out, she soon fell asleep on the bed, and then Miss Bethany descended to the stairs to find Joey and Elisaveta waiting for her at the bottom. "Come into my study and tell me what you know of this," she said. They followed her into the room. "What began it all?" she asked, when they were sitting down. "Miss Wilson had forgotten her ref's whistle," explained Joey. "She had left it in our dormitory this morning, when she came in after games with us. I banged myself, and she came upstairs to see that I put something on the places, 'cause Matron was busy over at Le Petit Chalet. She asked the Robin to go and fetch it for her, and the babe said she would. Then Miss Wilson remembered that you had said that the little ones were not to go into the dormitories at all, so she sent me after her to send her back and get the whistle myself. I was too late, though, 'cause the Robin had run, and I couldn't 'cause my knees rather stiff, and when I got there, Matron was shaking her and calling her a bad girl to break the rules like that. The robin said she had been sent, and Matron told her not to tell lies. The kid was wild. She's a brownie, and anyway, she never tells lies. She told Matron that she was rude not to believe her. It made Matron wild, and she shook her harder. And she said she would lock her up in her cupboard to teach her to speak the truth. The robin began to cry and said she had spoken the truth, and Matron lugged her along and locked her in her room, and then the robin began to cry ever so hard. Elisaveta came along, and then we begged Matron to let her out. I said Miss Wilson had sent her, and she said, "A likely story." And Joey flushed darkly at this point, and the princess took up the tale. She was horrid to Joey, and when Miss Durant heard us and came and told Matron that you never let anyone be locked up, she was rude to her. And then Miss Maynard came and tried to make her let Robin out, and Joe and I came for you, and that's all. Elisaveta suddenly ran down and wriggled in her chair. "I see," said Miss Bethany quietly. "Thank you, girls. That's all I want from you just now. You may go and send the others to me." They got up and went to the door. She called them back. "You will of course say nothing about this affair at present." "Yes, madame," replied Elisaveta. Jo waited till she had gone, and then she turned to her sister. "Did you mean what you said to Matron just now, Madge?" "Yes, I meant it, Joey," replied Miss Bethany gently. A tap at the door interrupted them, and Miss Bethany got up and went to tell the others that nothing was to be said to the school at large about the afternoon's occurrences until she gave them permission. "Matron will be leaving us shortly," she said. "Let that be sufficient for just now." Miss Bethany sent for Mademoiselle and told her what had occurred, and asked her to make out a check for the term's salary for Matron. When that was done, they sent for her, and after a most unpleasant interview, sent her off to pack. It was too late for her to leave the Brassau that day, but she was to go to one of the hotels for the night. Miss Bethany had decided that she should not spend another night under the roof of the Chalet School. Herr Braun of the Crown Prince Karl would put her up and see her to the first train down to the Sparts in the morning, and they would be finished with her. Miss Webb made herself as nasty as she knew how, but even she was rather subdued by the tone in the young head's voice, and finally she took the generous check they gave her and departed to her room to pack up her boxes. Egan would go to fetch his elder brother Hans from the Crown Prince Karl to help him carry them to the steamer in the morning, and by 6 o'clock Matron had shaken the dust of the Chalet School off her shoes, and they were rid of her. Very little was said to the robin that night. She was told that Matron had gone away and would not come back. Then Madge and Joey set themselves to amuse her and make her forget what had happened. She was put to bed early, for she was still tired and unlike herself, and Madge sat beside her till she had fallen asleep. As for the SSM, its days were over, which was just as well. The members turned their attention to other things, and the Chalet School settled down to its old tranquility. Chapter 10. Elisaveta is enrolled. "Elisaveta, are you ready?" Joey Bethany looked excited as she came to the princess, who stood alone behind the horseshoe formation in which most of the others were drawn up. The only exception to the rule were the color parties, which had just taken their places in front of their other guides, and now stood like images, holding the flags. In front of the guides stood the brownies, very thrilled at this enrollment of the princess. The entire school knew who Elisaveta was by this time, and holding their best to look smart and workmanlike. Elisaveta, clad in blue jumper and skirt, with her yellow tie hanging loose, where the others had theirs pinned with the little metal badge that meant so much to them all, marched forward shyly at Joey's side. Between the flags stood Miss Bethany in their captain's uniforms, and other officers behind her, and on one side Crown Prince Karl of Belsornia, who had managed to snatch a week's holiday to come and see his little daughter enrolled. He wore his white and silver uniform as colonel of the Royal Guards, and his medals flashed in the sunlight, even though he stood erect and still. Eyes front had resting on his sword hilt. He had been overjoyed at the difference in Elisaveta when he saw her. She was rosy with long hours in the open air, simple food, quiet sleep, and jolly friends, who teased her, laughed with her, and helped her to get into mischief as often as possible. She was losing her only child way, and was becoming a thorough little schoolgirl. The Crown Prince thought that the doctor could no longer complain that her vitality was being sapped away. She came with Joey, very serious and full of the promises she was about to make. They marched up to where Miss Bethany stood, and then Joey saluted smartly and took 2 steps back, standing at attention, while the captain asked the simple question, "Do you know what your honor is?" "Yes," Elisaveta's reply rang out full of confidence. "Can I trust you, on your honor, to be loyal to God and to the king, and to help other people at all times, and to obey the guide law?" Up went Elisaveta's hand to the half salute as she replied in clear tones, "I promise on my honor to do my best, to be loyal to God and the king, to help other people at all times, and to obey the guide law. I trust you on your honor to keep this promise. You are now one of the great sisterhood of the guides." The captain's tone were very comforting. That was a quiet strength in her voice which Elisaveta found restful. The new guide gave her left hand to the guide grip, and then she half turned on the word of command and saluted the colors. Finally she saluted the company, and then she marched back to her patrol with Joey, the badge in her tie, and a deep resolve in her heart to do her best to keep her promises and to do the guide's honor by her behavior. Then the command rang out, "Company dismiss to patrol colors," and it was all over. Prince Karl smiled as Miss Bethany turned to him. "It is a splendid movement, mademoiselle. I hope, with His Majesty's permission, to establish a branch in Belsornia. I have been reading the books you sent me very carefully, and it seems to me that it's just what is needed for our young girls." "It is wonderful, sir," replied Madge quietly. "I'm glad you think of doing so." Then she gave a short order to Miss Maynard, and the guides gave an exhibition of company drill, which impressed him very much. After the company drill, the Cock and Poppy Patrol showed the work they had done in ambulance and stretcher drill, and the cornflowers and the swallows gave a good display of signaling with the Morse code. Then it was the turn of the Brownies, and they gave a remarkable version of the work of Florence Nightingale in the Crimea, showing that they could make knots calculated to remain tied, and they knew quite a surprising amount about elementary bandaging and signaling, slowly, of course, but quite accurately, in semaphore with their arms. They also treated him to a powwow ring, saying their verse, "There were 2 6s," and finished up with the Brownie howl. He was delighted in it, and when it was over and the school raced to its dormitories to change into frocks before meals, he said so to the captain. "I like your father, Elisaveta," observed Joey as she struggled into fresh clothes. "He has a lot of sense. He's a dear," said his daughter fervently. He was. 2 days after he had gone there came a huge parcel addressed to the school, and when they opened it, they found inside 20 new books for the library, 24 of the best tennis balls, and 30 gramophone records. "You've got a splendid father, Elisaveta," said Grizel Cochrane. "I do think he is the kindest man I've ever heard of." "Daddy always likes doing things like that," said his daughter, coloring with pleasure at the words. Grizel was a lordly person, so her condescension in saying such a thing to a mere middle, and a new girl at that, was simply amazing. Elisaveta had been long enough to school to realize that, and, in any case, it was quite in keeping with all the best traditions of her beloved books. On the tennis court she found an agitated Margia waiting for her. "Well, you might have hurried a little," was the young lady's greeting. "What on earth have you been doing?" "Nothing much," replied Elisaveta. "I've been talking, that's all." "Well, come on now. Let's get started. If we hang about much longer, we shall have the big ones coming and saying we've had the court long enough. Will you toss for service?" Elisaveta twirled her racket, and Margia called, as she won the call. With it, the court with the sun behind her, she smoothed down, and they were soon hard at it. They were very evenly matched. Elisaveta had sometimes played with her father, and had very swift service for a little girl. Margia had a splendid forehand drive, considering that she was only 13, but her backhand was weak. Neither could volley, and any attempt at it always brought about disaster. The games perfect, Grizel herself strolled over to watch them presently, and with her came Juliet Cochrane, the head's ward, and the head girl of the school. Juliet was nearly 18, and was a very capable person. She had made up her mind to teach, and was working for a mathematics scholarship at the University of London, and she wanted to go there, work for a science degree, and then come back and teach at the Chalet School. Jo wandered along, and joined them after a while. "Margia is really good, isn't she?" she remarked. Juliet nodded. "She is shaping up very well," she said. "That new child, Elisaveta, is going to be a good one, too. She hasn't anything like Margia's strength, of course, but she's a very decent service already." "She says it's all the practice she does," said Joey. "She says her arm muscles are so developed that she can hit harder than most people." "Her backhand strokes are frightfully weak, though," put in Grizel. "Look at that attempt. Rotten simply doesn't describe it." "No wonder when you notice the way she holds her racket," said Juliet. "The wonder is she can do anything with it. What's the score, anyone?" Elisaveta answered her as Margia missed a return on the back line. 40-30. "Send that ball back, Margia, will you please? I have only one at this end." The hopes of their side, said Joey with a grin. "Isn't it a pity we can't play against any other schools?" "It is, rather," said Juliet. "There, that's game to Elisaveta. Hop across and tell Margia about holding her racket properly, Grizel." Grizel strolled across the court and proceeded to give a lecture on how to hold one's racket for the backhand drive, illustrating with wide sweeps of Margia's racket. The tennis match went on between the two, but Joey marched off into the house. There she encountered her sister, who was holding an open letter in her hand, and looking more disturbed than Joey had ever seen her before. "Madge, what's the matter?" she asked in startled tones. Miss Bethany looked at her abstractedly. "I wish you wouldn't use my name like that, Joey," she said. "Anyone might hear you." "There isn't anyone here," replied Jo, slipping her hand through her sister's arm. "What's the matter, old thing?" "It's nothing you can help, Joey." "You never know." "Don't shut me out, Madge." "We've always shared things." "I know." Miss Bethany looked at the clever, sensitive face at her shoulder. "Sometimes I think, Joey, that you've put too much on yourself. I don't want to spoil your childhood." "It won't spoil anything to share your fusses." "There's only us," said Robin. "Dick seems so far away since he married Molly." "You've got to get married next." I hope I won't be like that." Madge pulled the child into the study. Joey, baby, you won't really think that. Jim will only be like an extra brother. It's different with Dick and Molly. They've never seen her. We don't really know her. Don't think of it like that, Joey, or I must put off the wedding till you are grown up. Joey flung her arms round her sister in a tempestuous hug. I'm a beast to say such things. I know it'll be all right. Jim is dear, and I hope you will be married soon, so don't be silly, old thing. Madge still looked troubled. Truth and honor, Joey. Truth and honor, Joey assured her. I didn't really mean it, and I only think it very rarely. Honor bright, I do. Madge's face cleared. I'm glad of that, Joey, she said, slowly. You see, this is the last term. Jim and I hope to be married in July. Joey looked at her, then she gulped hard. Tell me what is wrong with your letter, she asked in a husky voice. Madge answered hurriedly. It is from the Prince Carl, Joey. He writes to tell me that he is afraid of his cousin Cosmo make an attempt to kidnap the princess. He has quarreled with the king, and Prince Carlo as well, and he made some threat of kind once before when they had a difference of opinion. He does not know where she is. No one in Belsornia except them, her maid, Alette, and Dr. Tracy do. But he's afraid he may find out, and then, if he does, Elisaveta must be taken somewhere into safe hiding until the trouble is over. He warns me not to let her speak to any strangers. If ever you see any attempt to speak to her, Joey, you must stop it somehow. They don't want her to know anything about it, as she might become afraid or nervous. Don't say anything, but just watch. I'll stick to her like glue, promised Joey. But I say, Madge, it's rather awful, isn't it? What would he do to her if he got her away? Kill her? Nonsense, Joey. Don't let your imagination run away with you like that. The worst thing that he would do would be to hold her as a hostage while he made the king and the prince do as he wanted. But he wouldn't hurt her. He would get into all sorts of trouble if he did that. I see, said Joey thoughtfully. Well, I'll do my best. She's awfully jolly, isn't she? It is hard luck that she can't be a queen some day. They have the Salic law in Belsornia, replied Madge. I don't think a queen's is such a enviable existence. I wish I knew what would be the best thing to do, she went on, more to herself than to her sister. So long as he doesn't know where she is, she's pretty safe. But I think I'll ask him to send someone to whom I could apply if there were any difficulties. Joey looked solemn. Do you think he is likely to kidnap her, Madge? Goodness knows. I don't see how he can find out where she is, because she came like any other new pupil, and certainly no one is making any extra fuss over her. But it's rather a big responsibility. I don't know that I should have taken her if I had dreamt there would be any trouble like this. Oh, well, we don't know that he'll try to cart her off, said Joey easily. And we can keep an eye on her. I will myself, if that's any comfort to you. I accept your offer, returned her sister. What about a game of tennis? If we can get 2 other people to make up a set. Rather, come on. And the troubles all forgotten for the moment, they made their way to the tennis courts for a strenuous set.